Let me tell you a story about some serious courage. It's about one journalist who stumbled upon a horrifying truth, a state-sponsored secret, and he refused to look away. He chose to speak up, even when the most powerful voices in the world were trying to drown him out. This is a story about truth fighting propaganda, with literally millions of lives hanging in the balance.
Okay, so just look at this. This is where our story really kicks off. March 31st, 1933. You've got two headlines from two major newspapers talking about the exact same country on the exact same day. On the left, the New York Times says, "Russians hungry but not starving." Okay. But on the right, London's Evening Standard declares, "Famine rules Russia." I mean, how is that even possible? How can both be true? Well, spoiler alert, they can't. One of them is a lie, and we're going to find out which one.
So picture this. It's the early 1930s. The rest of the world is just getting slammed by the Great Depression. But the Soviet Union, they're selling this incredible dream to the world, a dream called the 5-year plan. It was supposed to be this amazing leap forward into an industrial paradise. And you know what? The Western press, for the most part, they totally bought it.
And this right here, this was the official story. It's a classic narrative, right? A story of heroic sacrifice. The message they were pushing was simple. Hey, things might be a little tough right now, but it's all for a glorious future. A worker's paradise is just around the corner. It was powerful, it was persuasive, and it was being broadcast all over the world by some very influential people.
And the most influential voice of them all belonged to this guy, Walter Duranty. He was the man in Moscow for the New York Times. And get this, he'd won a Pulitzer Prize. He was the expert, the one person the world trusted to tell them what was really going on inside this secretive new Soviet state. What he wrote, well, that became the truth for millions of readers. But while Duranty was reporting from the comfort of Moscow, someone else arrives on the scene. A young Welsh journalist named Gareth Jones. And here's the thing about Jones. He had zero interest in the official script. He was there to see things with his own two eyes.
And Gareth Jones was, you could say, uniquely built for this job. For starters, his mom had been a tutor in Ukraine, so he grew up speaking fluent Russian, a huge advantage. He'd even advised a British prime minister, so he knew his way around politics. But the most important thing, they called him an unshepherded visitor. That meant he flat out refused the carefully planned government tours. He wanted to get away from the minders and just talk to regular people.
And this right here, this shows you exactly how he operated. He was described as this incredibly earnest and meticulous guy. He carried a notebook everywhere, and I mean everywhere, just writing down everything he saw, every single conversation he had. These diaries would turn out to be an absolutely crucial record of a crime that the world was desperately trying to ignore.
So, in March of 1933, Jones decides to do something that was completely, totally forbidden. See, foreign journalists were not allowed to travel into the countryside on their own. So what does he do? He packs a rucksack with food, buys a regular train ticket, and then at some small random station in the middle of nowhere, he just gets off. And he starts walking.
Now, I want to be really clear about the kind of risk he was taking. This wasn't some officially approved press trip with protections. No, he paid for this out of his own pocket. He knew at any moment the secret police could just pick him up. But he was convinced that the only way to get the real story was to get away from the official guides and go right into the heart of the Ukrainian countryside.
And the reality he found, it was just instant and devastating. That whole official story of progress and sacrifice just crumbled away into these horrified whispers. He heard from peasants who told him how the government had seized their land, their animals, for these new collective farms, the kolkhozs, and just left them with absolutely nothing. He didn't just find hunger. He found an entire nation just consumed by grief. The suffering was everywhere he looked. Another entry he wrote in his diary is just 4 simple words. All are weeping. Just think about that. 4 words that capture a whole world of pain.
And everywhere he went, it was the same story, the same cry. There is no bread. He was walking through villages where people were trying to survive on whatever scraps they could find, where death was just everywhere. This wasn't some simple food shortage. This was a man-made catastrophe.
So, Jones makes it out of Ukraine, gets to Berlin, and he tells the world everything he saw. You'd think people would be horrified, that the story would be front-page news everywhere. But that's not what happened. The establishment didn't just ignore him.
it turned on him hard.
This was his big press release, his testimony to the world. And it was so simple, so direct. It was just the facts. He named the places he'd been, he quoted the people he'd talked to, and he laid out the truth just as he had written it down in his notebook.
And then came the counterattack. From who else? The Pulitzer Prize winner, Walter Duranty. Now you have to read these words carefully, because it's a masterclass in deception. He says there's no starvation, but then admits people are dying from diseases caused by malnutrition. You see what he's doing? It's a cynical word game designed to sow confusion and completely shred Jones's credibility.
So, while the whole world is reading Duranty's clever denial, what's Jones's response? Well, privately, in his own diary, he wrote his own verdict on the most celebrated journalist in Moscow. Just 4 words: I don't trust Duranty.
And the really tragic part? The smear campaign worked. Duranty's version of the story won the day. Jones was shut out, his career was basically ruined, and for the next 70 years, he was essentially erased from the history of journalism. The truth about the famine was buried right along with his reputation.
But, that's not the end of the story. History has a very long memory. And while Jones was silenced for a time, the truth he fought to tell, it eventually found its way into the light. And his courage was finally recognized.
That event, that man-made terror famine that Gareth Jones was the first to expose to the West, it now has a name, the Holodomor. And that word itself, it comes from Ukrainian, and it literally means to kill by starving. It's a name that recognizes the horror and, crucially, the intent behind it.
And today, the historical consensus is crystal clear. The Holodomor was not a bad harvest. It wasn't a policy that went wrong. It is now recognized by Ukraine and many, many other countries for what it was, a deliberate act of genocide. It was an attempt to crush the Ukrainian people by weaponizing food itself.
So what about the reporter who was called a liar and cast out? Well, today, Gareth Jones is celebrated in Ukraine as a national hero. The man who was airbrushed from history is now honored for his unbelievable bravery, for telling a truth that absolutely no one in power wanted to hear.
Which really brings us to a final thought for today. The story of Gareth Jones isn't just about something that happened in the 1930s. It's about right now. It's about the constant battle between facts and propaganda, and about the immense courage it takes to speak up for those who have no voice. It really makes you wonder, who are the Gareth Joneses of our time? And maybe, even more importantly, are we listening to them?